So when I say the name Lawrence of Arabia, what do you picture? Probably this, right? The romantic hero in those flowing white robes leading a desert army to victory. I mean, it is one of the most powerful and enduring images of the entire 20th century. But behind that legend was a man who was way more complex, more brilliant, and honestly more haunted than the myth would ever have you believe. So let's peel back the layers of this incredible life.
And really, who better to introduce that complexity than the man himself? This is what T.E. Lawrence actually wrote after the war. I mean, listen to that. Those aren't the words of some triumphant hero. That's a man who's just consumed by a sense of shame, of deception. And that feeling of being a fraud, that's the key to understanding his entire story.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question. Who was the real T.E. Lawrence? To figure that out, we have to start by understanding how the myth got built in the first place, and then, piece by piece, we're going to tear it down to find the man underneath.
Right, so to get to the real person, we first have to get a handle on the legend. And that story, it doesn't begin in the desert. No, it begins in a concert hall. See, the image of Lawrence we all know and recognize wasn't just some accident of war. It was a deliberate, spectacular creation.
The guy who created this legend was an American journalist named Lowell Thomas. Back in 1919, he toured the world with what was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first multimedia show. I mean, he had film, he had hand-colored photos, a live orchestra, the whole deal. And he was selling this really romantic vision of the war to a public that was just desperate for a hero. And he found one in Lawrence, rebranding this quiet intellectual officer into an enigmatic blue-eyed prince. The show was a total sensation, and it made T.E. Lawrence one of the most famous men on the entire planet. But here's the thing. The man Lowell Thomas presented to the world, he was a caricature. The real Lawrence wasn't some born adventurer. He was a meticulous, almost obsessive scholar, and his journey to war began in the libraries and fields of Oxford.
His path was, let's just say, anything but typical. He was born illegitimate, a secret that kind of gave him this lifelong sympathy for outsiders. And he wasn't like other kids. Instead of sports, he trekked 1,100 miles alone through Syria just to study Crusader castles for his thesis. I mean, think about that. An act of incredible academic and physical endurance that, yeah, earned him top honors at Oxford. And that led directly to archaeological work that, by 1914, was really just a thin cover for British military intelligence, mapping the Ottoman frontier. His scholarship wasn't just for books, it was strategic.
And this is where it all clicks into place. His study of castles gave him a completely different way of seeing warfare. You can think of it as a structuralist view. He learned that a castle is only as strong as its weakest point. So he looked at the massive Ottoman Empire not as an army to be fought head-on, but as this giant structure, a building, held together by one single vulnerable spine, the Hejaz Railway. And he realized you don't have to destroy the whole building if you can just break its support beams.
So with this totally unique perspective, he was able to write a completely new rulebook for warfare, one that would end up influencing insurgents and special forces for the next 100 years.
Lawrence broke down insurgency into three core elements. First up, you've got the algebraic, the hard, measurable stuff. He argued it was way better to destroy one bridge than kill 100 soldiers, because that bridge couldn't be easily replaced. Then, the biological, which is all about protecting your own men. His Arab fighters weren't professionals. Their survival was everything, so no suicidal charges. And finally, and this might be the most important one, the psychological, winning over the population. He knew a rebellion absolutely needed the support of the people to have any chance. His whole idea is just brilliantly summed up by his own metaphor. He said his Arab force shouldn't be a solid block of soldiers that could get cornered and crushed. No, it should be like a vapor, a gas that's everywhere and nowhere at the same time, striking and then vanishing before the enemy even knows what hit them. And this wasn't just some theory, okay? In practice, it was brutally effective. Take Aqaba. Instead of this suicidal attack from the sea, his forces swept in from the wide-open desert where the guns weren't even pointing. His constant sabotage of the Hejaz Railway, it was like death by 1,000 cuts, tying down tens of thousands of Turkish troops. And it all led to the fall of Damascus and the total collapse of Ottoman power in the region.
But here's the tragedy of the whole story. Lawrence's military genius was about to slam head-on into the cynical reality of imperial politics. The very victory he had engineered would become the source of his greatest shame.
And here is the devastating contradiction at the heart of his entire mission. On the ground, he was promising his Arab allies, men he had fought with, bled with, a unified, independent Arab state. All the while, he knew that back in London and Paris, politicians were secretly signing the Sykes-Picot Agreement,
which carved up that exact same land for themselves. He was fighting for a promise he knew his own government was planning to break.
So you can imagine when he shows up at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 to argue for the Arab cause, he was just crushed by the hypocrisy of it all. This is where that quote from the beginning comes from, that successful trickster. He had won the war, but he felt he had completely betrayed the very people who had helped him win it.
But even with all that disillusionment, Lawrence was still a pragmatist. In 1921, Winston Churchill brought him in to help clean up the mess. At the Cairo Conference, Lawrence helped come up with the Sharifian solution. It was a compromise, sure, but it created the nations of Iraq and Transjordan and put his wartime allies, Faisal and Abdullah, on their thrones. It wasn't the full independence he'd promised, but he was trying to salvage something for his friends.
So the war was over, the map had been redrawn, but now Lawrence faced a totally new enemy, his own fame, and he would go to some truly extraordinary lengths to escape it.
You really have to get your head around this. Because of Lowell Thomas's show, Lawrence Arabia was a global phenomenon. He was a superstar, the uncrowned king of Arabia. People would mob him on the street. It was literally everything he hated.
So what does he do? The absolute opposite of what any celebrity would do. He tried to disappear. He gave up his rank of colonel and enlisted as a common airman, a private, under a fake name. He wanted the anonymity and the rigid structure of barracks life, anything to escape the crushing weight of his own legend.
But eventually, he found a new and completely unexpected purpose. After being discovered and forced out, he found his way back into the Royal Air Force, but not as a strategist. No, he became a mechanic and a technician, and he poured all that incredible intellectual energy into co-developing a new generation of high-speed rescue boats.
And the impact of this work was staggering. The man who invented a new way to wage war spent his last years inventing a new way to save lives. It's estimated that during World War II, boats that were based on his design saved the lives of 13,000 Allied airmen. It's an incredible and mostly unknown final chapter to his story.
His legacy is just as complex and unexpected as the man himself. The borders he helped draw in 1921 are still, for the most part, the borders of the Middle East today. The tactics he perfected were a direct inspiration for David Sterling when he founded the elite SAS. And, in a final tragic irony, his death from a motorcycle crash in 1935 prompted the neurosurgeon who treated him to campaign for the mandatory use of crash helmets, saving countless more lives.
Which brings us right back to our original question. Was he a hero who led a nation to freedom? A fraud who served an empire that betrayed his friends? Or a tragic genius who revolutionized warfare, politics, and even public safety, but could never, ever find peace within himself? Well, the answer, just like the man, is probably all of the above. And that is a story far more interesting than any simple legend.